Well, if you've just connected to the call, we're just waiting a minute or two to let more attendees dial in. Uh, the You should be able to hear me. This is Ron Gallagher at PAMIC, and I'll do a quick opening introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Mike Humphreys at the insurance department, who will then take it over from there. So for those that are on, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedules today for this live question and answer with the insurance department. Today's presentation is brought to you by the Insurance Federation of Pennsylvania. Sam Marshall is on this call as well, and the Pennsylvania Association of Mutual Insurance Companies. Hopefully, we'll be able to respond to all the questions that you do have. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brittany Milnick from PAMIC, who's just going to go over how to use the system to submit your questions. So Brittany, it's all yours.
Our attendees can answer or post questions by the Q&A section that could be either at the top or the bottom of your screen. You simply just need to click that Q&A and type in your question, and it'll be sent over directly to our panelists. Correct.
So it's that simple. You will not be able to ask a question because of the number of attendees that we do have. So we do ask for all of your questions to come in using the question and answer feature within the Zoom feature that we're using. So Mike, why don't I just turn it over to you, and then you can start off the call.
Hey, Ron, this is Jessica. I think you're actually turning it over to me, if that's all right.
That's, Commissioner, you can do whatever you want.
Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. This is Jessica Altman calling in from my living room, as I'm sure many of you are. I want to begin by thanking all of you for taking the time to join today, and to thank Ron and PAMIC and Sam and team at the IFP for coordinating this webinar. We're here to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on the insurance industry, our businesses, how we're all responding to COVID-19 in that regard. But I want to start by noting that the impact of COVID-19 hits us all personally as much, if not more, than it does professionally. And so with that, my thoughts are with everyone in the Commonwealth, including you and your teams, and please make sure to take the time to take care of yourselves and your families in this challenging time. I want to start by just talking a little bit about the Commonwealth's broader response to COVID-19, which has been, fast and effective, both in our direct response to COVID-19, but also in ensuring continuity of operations for all of the core functions of various state agencies, while all Commonwealth facilities are now closed to non-essential employees. I'm going to just highlight some of the Commonwealth-wide response before talking briefly about PID's operations. First, I could not speak more highly of the leadership of Governor Wolf, Secretary of Health Rachel Levine, and Director of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, Randy Padfield, at this time. If you have not been following their information, their guidance, their daily briefings, their daily press releases, they are really doing an unbelievable job with their teams in their response. All of the steps that are being taken are with the health and well-being of Pennsylvanians top of mind, and really before anything else, which is where we are today. The Commonwealth is doing their best to be informative, to be transparent, and to continually provide guidance where guidance is needed, and guidance is needed in many, many areas, as you can understand. I know that at the end of last week, there was a lot of focus on the guidance to close on non-life sustaining businesses across the Commonwealth, and the changes in that guidance between Thursday and Friday. Throughout that period, we appreciated all of the communication between the department and industry. I think we were all trying to do our best to get answers and get questions out there as quickly as we could. And I think you all now know that insurance is officially designated life-sustaining under the governor's guidance, with the exception of in-person sales for insurance policies. I think this speaks really to the significant role of the insurance industry in our economy and serving Pennsylvanians and providing many of the resources that Pennsylvanians may be relying on during this period. And so please know that the administration has recognition of that. With that guidance, it does remain critical for insurers to do all that they can to keep people safe and at home. And I say that knowing that many of you are thinking about this, prioritizing this, and doing everything you can already. But just to highlight a few, if there's anything that you can be doing over telework rather than being in an office, do it over telework. If there's something that can't be done over telework but doesn't need to be done, don't do it right now. If you do need to have people in the office, and I know that there are cases where you do, anything that you can put in place to ensure health and safety, such as encouraging social distancing or other preventive measures, should be done. We've also seen throughout this a stress on the importance of coordinating and communicating with others. You know, health insurers and how you communicate with your provider networks, all insurers and how you communicate with your sales forces, agents and brokers, etc. And so just a couple of highlights there. Now, once again, I know you are all thinking about these things. I know you are all doing many of these things, but the more that we can all do as an industry, the better for the future of Pennsylvania to, bear well through this crisis. To focus on PID operations, I think this has been communicated, but while all of our offices are closed currently, all of our core functions are up and running. Most of our teams are operating via telework, and mostly our functions are going on as usual. Now, there are certain limitations, certain service disruptions, as many of our teams are connected to Commonwealth through VPN, and that has had some issues with capacity, but largely speaking, we are up and running. We are very focused on being as responsive as we can be, on getting out guidance where guidance is needed, and we will continue to try to circulate guidance widely to the extent that we are fielding questions that are relevant to all or a large portion of industry. But we also encourage any of you, to the extent that you have company-specific issues, to have case-by-case conversations, to reach out to the department if you need to talk about ways that your operations may be limited at this time. We are more than happy to have those conversations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who's going to just talk a little bit about what the NAIC is up to given this, and then we're going to have Sandy and John talk about some of the guidance we have put out thus far. But I'll just close by saying thank you again for all that you are already doing to be responsive to COVID-19. Thank you for taking the time to be here today, to hear from the department. We'll do our best to answer the questions you have. Please stay healthy. I hope your families stay healthy, and we look forward to continuing to work together through this difficult time for all of us. So thank you, and Mike, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So welcome everyone, and just wanted to let you know that I do see the Q&A queue is starting to fill up. So we will get to those questions, as many of them as we can, following the brief conversations by Sandy and John. If we don't get to your question today, you're welcome to reach out to the department, email us directly. There's a number of these questions, though, that I think will be answered as part of the presentation. So that may be another reason that I do not get to your question. Just bigger picture, I know many of you participated last week. There was a 2-hour conference call webinar held by the NAIC, where regulators heard from interested parties across the industry spectrum, and also medical professionals about the country's response to the COVID outbreak. I think some of the key takeaways related to the idea that we regulators will try to coordinate to the extent possible to limit multi-state requests of carriers. There's going to be a number of kind of work streams that looks at financial reporting and other issues where there are consistent deadlines across the states, and how we can address that to work most efficiently as an industry and as a regulatory community. So we're welcome to take feedback on that. You can direct feedback through PAMIC, through IFP. You can reach out directly to us. But we will be participating on various NAIC work streams to provide additional guidance, as well as to inform guidance that we will issue as PID. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Sandy first, who is going to overview the bulletin that the department issued primarily on health issues. Sandy, if you're available.
I'm here. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I feel like I'm almost talking about old news. This is a bulletin that made it into the Pennsylvania Bulletin this past weekend, but we pre-released it a week and a half before that. So the health insurers really had an opportunity to get ahead of the curve. And at the time we released it, it looked like the focus of our work was going to be on assuring access to testing. There was no stay-at-home order. There were no quarantines, isolations, big picture the way there are now. And the focus of our notice, and it was notice 2020-03, was to assure that there were no barriers to getting the testing that needed to be done. And so we focused on making sure there was communication to consumers, that the testing would be covered, addressing balanced billing, addressing telehealth, network adequacy, and so forth. And to their credit, the health insurers and health insurers that are on this call, thank you. The health insurers have done a terrific job of doing what could be done to get ahead of things so that consumers do have access to the care that they need. In particular, though, I'll note let me jump next to what happened at the federal level. As you know, Congress has been hard at work on a couple of bills. They first passed an appropriations bill, then they passed the Families First bill. And that bill, now law, does provide for coverage of the testing for COVID-19 with no cost sharing and no utilization management, so no prior authorization or other medical management. And so that codified at the federal level what we had asked and what we understood the carriers were already starting to put into place at the state level. So we were encouraged by the consistency there, and hopefully that didn't throw any hiccups for the health insurers. The focus then has switched towards the telemedicine or telehealth effort. And here that effort is broader than just COVID-19 because so much of health, whether it's behavioral health or physical health, typically takes place in a face-to-face forum. And the concern is that if you're going to provide social distancing, one way to do that is through telehealth. And so there have been efforts at both the federal level as well as the state level to provide for that, including an HHS Office of Civil Rights notice that eased enforcement of HIPAA provisions. And we think on the whole that is working well. There are some hiccups and we're looking to address those, whether those are systemic or systems issues or something more we're trying to discern, but we call on the health insurers to help us continue to provide the care that is necessary, preferably with the social distancing, in a way that provides for consumers and knocks down any barriers to provide those services. So that's a very brief overview of the health side. And now I'm going to turn it to John Lasik, who can talk about the other angles of what we're doing.
Thank you, Sandy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Lasik. I am a department counsel at the Pennsylvania Insurance Department. I handle P&C issues, corporate and financial solvency. And what has been asked of me here is to discuss a series of notices which we have issued. We issued 3 notices when we discovered, or when we got the order from Governor Wolf to close down Commonwealth agencies. And 2 of these are more of practical considerations of how the department views going forward, how we're going to continue operations. And then 1 deals generally with what we're expecting to see from the insurance industry here in response to this. And I'm going to start with the 2 practical operational bulletins. The first and foremost is we issued a bulletin. All these bulletins were issued March 19th, and they are available on our website. So if you have not had a chance to look at them, I'd encourage you to go to the website and review these. The first one I want to talk about here is the notice we issued regarding electronic filings. So the department is still receiving mail and still processing mail, but our capacity to do so is diminished at this time. And not so much diminished from the standpoint of we won't get what you're sending us, it's just going to take us a little bit longer to process than we normally would. To this extent, in order to keep things running and to keep operations going, we encourage companies to submit whatever they can to us electronically. So specifically, our Office of Corporate and Financial Regulation, they are going to temporarily accept electronic filings. But this is also true of if you're making a product filing. If you can't do it through SURF, please try to do it through an email attachment. Basically, any other kind of filing that you might have to make with the department, if you can make it electronically, please do. This will help you avoid any delay in processing whatever you need to get done. So whether that's a form transaction, an annual statement, producer licensing, or appointment billing, if you can do those things electronically, please do so. We are still processing mail, but again, in order to speed the ability of the department to resolve issues and resolve filings in front of it, we really encourage you folks to file electronically where you can. The next bulletin that we have issued was really aimed more at producers and other individual licensees of the department, but we feel it's important that you understand exactly what we're telling producers as well. We are at this point suspending all continuing education requirements, and I want to be specific about this. We are suspending CE requirements. We are not waiving CE requirements. So we understand at this point that it is hard for folks to get out and have in-classroom continuing education. We don't think that anyone's license should be suspended or non-renewed because they can't physically go and get their CE credit. So we are at this point processing licensing applications without CE as necessary. We've suspended those requirements. There will be at some point a catch-up that we will have to do with our licensees where we do end up getting the required CE certifications in. But right now, our primary concern is minimalizing disruptions to the industry, and we understand that that is one of the areas where it's been very impractical or next to impossible to actually get CE in these conditions, given certain restrictions that have been placed on free movement. We have also told CE providers that they should suspend all in-classroom CE courses. We do encourage providers to offer electronic or online CE, but at this point, given the governor's orders, obviously continuing education is not a life-sustaining business, and therefore there will be no in-classroom instructions on continuing education. So just to summarize the first 2, where you folks can, please submit electronic filings to us, either email, through SURF, or whatever other means you have available to you. And then we are suspending CE requirements and processing renewal applications regardless of the CE status. Now, the last notice that we issued here is in regard to general guidance to the industry. These are the things that we are expecting from the industry. And before I get into this, I want to preface with, we understand that this is interrupting all of our schedules, that this is creating a difficult time for all of us to process our standard functions. So we encourage you, to the extent you have further questions that aren't answered here, to reach out to us in regard to this guidance. Let us know your particular circumstances, what issues you are dealing with, and then we can go from there. But there are certain things that we do expect, and this was released in the bulletin, again, March 19th bulletins on our website, that we do expect industry to work flexibly with their policyholders. The main thing right now is we want to ensure that insurance coverage remains available to folks. We want to make sure that health insurance is available, that people aren't having their policies canceled right now in this time. We want to make sure that people can access the care they need, access testing and the like. Similarly, we have concerns about keeping the general operation of P&C running. We understand that there are lots of insureds right now who have been affected by the necessary mitigation efforts that have been taken by Governor Wolf. This means some people are out of a job and cannot pay their insurance right now. This means that folks maybe aren't driving to work anymore, and so maybe their premiums don't necessarily reflect the actual risk. What we're encouraging industry to do is to consider these kinds of practical difficulties that your policyholders are going to be having, and to work with them to help resolve, for example, if there is a past due payment. Work with your insureds to ensure that coverage continues and that you ultimately work out a schedule for when the premiums can be paid. If you are going to, if what we don't want to see is mass cancellations and non-renewals here. I think that concerns us, whether that be for non-payment of premium or other reasons. Our goal right now is to ensure maximum coverage. So if you're going to be processing cancellations, non-renewals, I think you need to really consider what steps are available to you as insurers, to you as industry, to work with your policyholders before going down the line of a cancellation or non-renewal. I want to make clear that at this point, there is no moratorium on policy terminations. However, again, we expect that industry will do the right thing by their insureds and will not leave the citizens of this Commonwealth without insurance coverage at a time they most need it. Now, as I said before, and I'll throw this back to Mike here in just a second, but we understand that that imposes practical difficulties on you guys as well, the industry, and we certainly are not oblivious to that fact. We understand that this is difficult for you folks as well. And to the extent that you need more specific guidance that's not covered here today, that's not covered in our notice, please reach out. We are working with industry just like we hope you work with your policyholders. With that, I will turn it back over to Mike Humphreys. So Mike, you want to take it over?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So we have a number of questions that have come in, and we will try to go through and get to as many as we can. There were some that I think can be answered right off the bat, or that may have already been answered as part of that process. But what I'll do is, because I don't think everybody on the call can hear the question, so I'll read the question and then answer or work with the department staff, and we will collectively respond to your answers. So the first question I have is, if there's a stay-at-home order for your county, is anyone allowed to be in our physical office, or will all work be required to be remote? And I think this is a question that the commissioner talked about it at the very beginning. Governor Wolf's revised order as of Friday listed insurance, the business of insurance, as life-sustaining, meaning to the extent possible, work remotely, but your physical locations will be allowed. You will be allowed to have folks go in and work in the physical offices. The caveat there being we would request that you employ social distancing to the extent possible when you're doing that. And the other part being that the face-to-face sales solicitation negotiation of insurance is expressly prohibited in that revised guidance from the governor. Commissioner, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you got it, Mike.
Okay, great. Second question, is the department now capable of receiving SURF filings as usual? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, although we have discouraged you from submitting non-essential filing. Right now, we have our rate and form filing staff team is working from home. They're working through their laptops. You all know SURF is available online. Many of you are doing the same thing. So to the extent possible, if carriers could prioritize the filings and kind of review whether they need to make a filing at this time before submitting it in SURF, we would very much appreciate that. Shannon Logue, our Deputy Policy Rate and Form Filing, did you have anything to add?
No, you said everything that we're really trying to communicate.
Okay, great. Has the PID been in consultation with CMS regarding extending grace periods, delaying delinquency, special enrollment period issues concerning on exchange requirements? In other words, can we assume PID guidance are blessed and agreed upon by CMS? Short answer being not yet, but yes, we are in communication with CMS. Yes, we did send CMS through the governor's office. Actually, the governor reached out and urged CMS to declare a special enrollment period. I think those of you on the call on Friday heard from CMS that that's something that they are seriously considering, given the scope of the outbreak. Commissioner, did you want to add anything there, or Sandy?
Yeah, I'll add a couple things. First is we are very closely tracking everything coming from CMS and the federal government, and we do not believe any of the guidance that we have put forth is in conflict with the guidance being put forth by CMS. And if any company feels that it is, you should reach out to us as soon as possible. We're definitely not going to be clearing our guidance with CMS. That's not a part of our normal course of business, but we do work incredibly hard to ensure that it's consistent. The second is, as many of you know, the governor passed legislation or signed legislation, whether the legislature passed it, of course, to move Pennsylvania to a state-based exchange. That is scheduled to begin for coverage starting January 1st, 2021. And so currently, when it comes to the marketplace specifically, since SEPs were referenced, it is still CMS who will be making decisions like whether or not they will open an SEP, which is why the governor chose to write the letter asking them to do so. And so there are certainly cases where, we're cognizant of what the role of the state is versus what the role of CMS is in those situations. Sandy, anything you wanted to add?
I think you've covered most everything. The only thing I'll note is we are also obviously very attuned to what the NAIC is doing, and the NAIC is coordinating communications with CMS for all of the states. And so we are keeping an eye and ear on that as well. So we are doing our best to make sure that any communications that go out are consistent across the board, and you aren't going to be caught in a situation where, do I comply with the federal or with the state? You will be able to comply with both.
Okay, next question, and there's a couple that kind of follow this theme, is will the department issue any temporary orders to prevent cancellation for non-pay? I think John talked a bit about, and I'll ask John to weigh in also, about flexibility, asking carriers to provide some flexibility in terms of cancellation, non-renewal, maybe look at working in payment plans where possible. And we recognize that that's going to be kind of on a case-by-case issue at times. So, I mean, I think the guidance that we've issued so far is to try to work with consumers to the extent possible. We recognize that There may be those situations where continued non-payment is going to end in a cancellation or non-renewal, but we do strongly urge carriers to try to work with consumers as far as they can before we would get to a step that would cause a coverage to terminate or otherwise non-renew. John, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think you covered it pretty well. I think, again, at this point, we have not issued any kind of moratorium on cancellations, but we certainly expect insurers to do the right thing here. We do understand that there is a delicate balancing act between providing some forbearance to consumers and running a sustainable and sound operation. We also understand that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this, and I think this is partly one of the reasons why we have been reluctant as of yet to issue a moratorium on cancellations. I think at this point we are waiting to see how this is going to work out. Each carrier is in a slightly different circumstance. We recognize that, and so what we're doing as of right now is encouraging carriers to look at their business operations, look at what they can do, and to start develop plans with your consumers on how to go forward. We understand that there will be some necessary cancellations that have to go during this. I mean, if just using an example, if you find serious misrepresentations or fraud on a policy, obviously that is to be treated differently than non-payment of premium because someone got laid off because they were in the restaurant industry. So I think as of right now, we are not issuing a one-size-fits-all prohibition. We expect industry to come up with their own plans and to work through this, balancing the needs of your consumers with the needs of your operations.
Very good. Next question is, please let us know if the department can accept electronic signatures and/or DocuSign at this time for filings to be filed electronically. We've had other insurance departments accept these formats. Yes, I think John mentioned this as part of his presentation. To the extent possible, filings that you have made in the past on paper would be helpful for us to receive electronically. So we are opening that up, particularly on the financial side. Obviously, many of you already use electronic systems like Surf, but to the extent that there are other requests that can be made electronically, we would like to see them made electronically, and I think it helps both you and us if we're able to make those transactions as electronic as possible. John, did you have anything to add there, or did anyone else from the department want to?
No, I think that's great.
And this is Shannon. I actually do have a little bit to add to that. So as far as the signatures within the filings, the Electronic Transaction Act potentially would apply for the consumers and policyholders, but we believe that the electronic filing of the actual forms that are filed would be fine. Not so much forms, but the files that you guys usually would submit that need signatures internally inside your organization would be fine.
Very good. Next question's a bit of a tricky one. Will there be relief from penalties if insurance carriers can't perform operations due to a shelter-in-place order, keeping them from getting payments to injured workers, returning refunds to policyholders? Now, I say that's tricky because I think we're blending essential and non-essential functions and asking through a single question. I think you can expect that we're going to be reasonable in terms of how we approach the industry. I think you've seen that over the last 2 weeks now as we've had conversations and also put out guidance. But the top priority of the department from a consumer protection standpoint is going to make sure that claims continue to be paid, to make sure policyholders are continued to be serviced through their insurance companies. So there's going to be less flexibility there than I think in some of the other areas, because I think as you all know too, in moving insurance back onto the list of life sustaining, which I think there's another question again about life sustaining. But there was a recognition of the critical role that insurance plays for many people who may be home on disability or otherwise need to pay the roofer who just fixed a hole in the top of their house and kind of mitigated a leaking scenario. So I think short answer would be that we would like to see the essential functions of the insurance companies continue, and there will be less flexibility in terms of the regulatory stick than I think there will be in other areas, kind of on filing timelines and that sort of thing, that are less critical to of the across the Commonwealth. So John or Chris or Commissioner, did you want to add to that?
This is Jessica. I'll add, I think in general, the message is do the absolute best that you can. But the way that we are approaching this is if you have an individual company question, and in many cases, it is easier for us to give more robust answers to these questions when you have, a specific example, a specific function out of a specific office to talk through with us, that we are doing our best in welcoming individual questions. But to the extent that we think in answering those questions, we're giving guidance that would be relevant to all or some of industry more broadly, we are working to distribute those to Sam and Ron and other insurers as well. So, we're trying to balance giving individual advice as well as making sure guidance is getting out there more broadly. So, we're kind of with these broad brush questions having to give broad brush answers, but if you have an individual circumstance, please feel free to reach out to the right folks in the department depending on the question you're asking, and hopefully you know who those are, but if not, Mike is always a catch-all.
Anybody else from the department?
This is John Lacey, just echoing what the commissioner said. We understand there is going to necessarily be some creativity here in processing essential services for the insurance industry. We're not going to, it's not our job to sit there and beat you over the head because you're doing something creative to service your clients. And so just along with what Commissioner Altman said, if you have a question, please come to us. If you're thinking about doing something creative, please come to us. Let us know what it is so that we can get our hands around what it is you're planning on doing. And perhaps that could be incorporated into some further guidance that comes out.
Very good. Okay, next question is going to be a Joe DeMemo question. Will the department allow for extensions on the June 1 corporate governance annual disclosure filing? And I think that's something that we have been coordinating, or that the NEIC is looking to coordinate with the financial folks, but I'll turn it over to Joe DeMemo, our Deputy over Financial Supervisor.
Yeah, good afternoon. There is no blanket extension at this point for the corporate governance annual disclosure filing. Obviously, this is going to be the first one in Pennsylvania. To the extent that the coronavirus, not working or telework continues into the future, that's something that we'll be looking at. But also, I would suggest that folks who are required to submit corporate governance annual disclosures, that they should take a look at the template that was prepared in conjunction with PAMIC and also the IFP in relation to a 4-page document that basically asks the questions that are required to be answered for the corporate governance. And that's probably a simple way of looking at what needs to be provided to the department under that disclosure. Now, you're not required to do that. You can do your own, but there is a template that appears on our website that is available for that. Now, to the extent that we get closer to June and this still hasn't resolved itself, we will be flexible in regards to hearing what the companies need in regards to extension. So I'm not putting that as a no. What I'm saying is right now there's no blanket extension, but to the extent that we go beyond the time period in the next 3 or 4 weeks that it becomes clear that June 1st is going to be an issue for the companies, we'll certainly be flexible in handling those requests on an individual basis.
Good. Thank you, Joe. Next question. Michael needs to talk directly into the microphone. Okay, not a question. After that, John, I think this is going to be coming to you. Will the Bureau suspend the requirement to have forms notarized at this time? This is something we discussed this morning. So if you could kind of provide some color on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so yeah, this is something that has been brought to our attention. Notarization requirements, powers of attorney, things like that. The kind of documents you would normally have, you know, a wet signature on, both parties signing in the presence of another. Obviously, that's becoming more difficult now as these orders start to take effect. We are of the opinion that the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act covers a lot of this, but there are certain provisions in state law which state something is not effective unless it's been notarized. And I think at this point, what we're trying to do is get our hands around what are the abilities of notaries, if at all, to operate either through the computer or some other means. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to waive notary requirements if the requirement is actually written into law. And what I mean by that is so one of the ones that came up was the power of attorney, and it says it is not effective unless it is notarized, and it's actually not one of our statutes, so we can't actually just waive that requirement. So I would strongly advise all the insurers to take a look at their notary requirements to see if they are insurance laws that we have the ability to waive, or if they are not, to seek proper redress through the appropriate agency. Now, with regards to the ones that are actually in the Pennsylvania Insurance Department's statutes, we believe we have thorough prosecutorial discretion, at least in regards to allowing you folks, again, to get creative and work through some of these issues. And I won't speak for Chris Monahan here, but I believe it would be very unlikely that we would exercise our prosecutorial powers for something like this. For, okay, you didn't get the notary, but that's because the notary wasn't available. So we are exercising our prosecutorial discretion and waiving requirements where we can. However, again, I implore you to look at the various notary requirements or any kind of requirements you'd have that would require 2 or more parties to actually meet face-to-face to execute a document. And I think it would be helpful for us if industry could come up with a list of various different requirements that they're seeing. Would that either require, you know, an in-person inspection, or require a notary, or require a signed power of attorney witnessed by 2 folks? If you guys are seeing that you're, you know, at least a decent amount of volume of these issues where you're not sure how to handle, please put together a list of those, send them to us. We will deal with the ones that we can. The ones that are written into statutes which aren't ours, we can certainly liaise with the appropriate department and try to get firmer guidance on that.
Thanks, John, and thanks for bringing in Chris. Chris, this next comment, there's a couple different questions, Chris, and it's a conversation we've already had today. So I wanted to bring you in to talk about in-person adjusting and appraisals, and kind of the message that we've been providing as those questions have come in. So I'll turn it over to Chris, our deputy over marketing.
Okay, you kind of faded out, Mike, but I heard the part about appraisals. And so the guidance that we've been asked to give is that under the governor's guidance, If you have to get out to do appraising or adjusting work, that is permitted. However, make sure that the appraiser or the adjuster does everything they can to maintain that social distancing. So you can look at cars, you can look at damage to properties, typically without having to interact with the consumer. And so if you can do so, go ahead and do it. Obviously, if there are things that you can do remotely, then that's the favored way to do it. However, we realize that with claims, you have to get out and actually look at things, and that is permissible as long as you adhere to the other guidelines. This would also apply to public adjusters as well, who have to get out and look at things. So the way we view it is the claims process needs to continue. If consumers won't let an appraiser or an adjuster on a property or allow them to look at a car, we understand that that's going to hold the claims process up. And again, I do not envision us taking some sort of enforcement or market conduct action on a company or an appraiser or adjuster because they're unable to look at a property or a car because the consumer would not allow them. We're going to take that into account. The consumer obviously has to understand that that's going to hold their claim up. But we are going to absolutely use discretion or leniency in these instances. But the appraiser and adjuster needs to do their job.
Thank you, Chris. Joe, we're going to come back to you. There's a question about whether we want paper filings of the April 1 MD&A supplemental investment risk interrogatory sent by regular mail, even if they've been submitted electronically to NEIC.
The answer to that question, Mike, is yes. All the filings, whether we accept them electronically or not, we want it followed up with a paper copy once you're able to do that.
Very good. And I think, Joe, there's another question that talks about would the DOI allow filing on time without a notary and then future hard copy notarizations? And actually, this one isn't necessarily just to Joe, so it'll be, we'll offer it to Joe and then maybe John. Would the DOI, sorry, I'll read it one more time. Would the DOI allow filing on time without a notary and then future hard copy notarizations once work in place is suspended in all states? Some of the signatures are occurring from multiple states.
The answer to that question, from my perspective, and this is Joe DeMemo speaking, is the answer is yes. We do expect that for the period of time we're allowing electronic filing, that can be done. Once we go back to work and everything's back to usual, we would expect a paper copy with the appropriate signatures and the notaries on it.
Very good. Let me see. We're being asked almost daily to reduce exposures for insured operations that are based on payroll, revenue, and so forth. Will the department offer guidelines on this? Some carriers seem willing to be reasonable and work with us. Others seem unwilling to make any exposure changes. Failing to respond well in this situation will be bad for small business and bad PR for our industry. John, I'll turn that over to you as it relates to some of the flexibility that we've been talking about being provided earlier in this call.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we understand the just knee-jerk reaction for insurers to reduce exposure out there, and I think we understand that. At the same point, now is not the time to be pulling back from the market. We do not want to see availability issues. We are encouraging companies to obviously not try to limit their exposure. We certainly understand no company wants to come to market with a brand new COVID-19 policy that's going to apply to just COVID-19. I think we get that. But our concern is having the insurance markets continue to function as normal. And I think to this end, if we begin to see insurers really pull back from the market, I think we will have to revisit our guidance and decide whether the approach we are taking right now, the approach of get creative, find out plans that work for you, we'll have to revisit and see whether that's still appropriate. I would encourage anyone who sees this kind of activity to report it to the department, and you can be assured that we will be reaching out to those companies to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And at this point, we do, we believe in not a one-size-fits-all draconian imposition of here's what you must do from A to Z. But at the same point, if we start to see disruptions to the marketplace, we're going to have to revisit that. So please, if you see it, reach out to us, let us know so that we can make the appropriate contacts to see what's going on. But at this point, again, our primary focus is having the insurance market go on as business as ordinary, the best of its ability.
Very good. Thanks, John. Next question gets back to health. So Sandy, I'm going to ask you to weigh in a minute. Is Pennsylvania considering making mandatory, like New York, that insurers and HMOs suspend pre-auth review and give hospitals leeway in providing to the insurer or HMO notice of emergency room admission? Sandy, are you there?
Sorry, I forgot to hit the unmute button.
Sure.
Unlike New York, we do not have authority to require things that are not in our laws. So we're not in a position to require waiving pre-authorization. However, as we put in our notice and as we have tried to say to the health insurers along the way, to the extent there's the ability to be flexible and to the extent a prior authorization would be a barrier to treatment, we're asking for flexibility and we're urging flexibility. But no, we do not have the authority that New York has to mandate a waiver or a denial of prior authorization requirements.
Very good.
Sorry, this is Jessica. I think right now, just pragmatically in this time, everyone should have a lot of empathy for what other sectors are going through. And I think hopefully on this call, you hear a lot of understanding and empathy from the department on what you all are struggling with in the insurance industry. But our healthcare system and our frontline providers are really going to bear a lot of the brunt of this. And so I think to the extent that health insurers can think of ways to remove barriers, to create flexibilities, to accommodate what frontline providers are going to need to be doing during this time, the better that is. If we're, you see CMS and our state agencies asking hospitals and providers to reschedule elective procedures, for example. If you already issued prior auth for a period of time for those procedures and they're rescheduling them for 6 months out, maybe don't make them go through that again through the prior auth process. Things like that, to just have an appreciation for what our providers are going to be going through during this time, and what maybe they shouldn't have to be spending their time on when we need them spending time on patient care.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I know we're running out of time, so Ron and Sam, I think this one is something that we may be able to work on. There's a couple questions here that ask the department about whether anything here in the Q&A is going to be published and made available. I'm not sure how the webinar itself functions, but we would be happy to work with Ron and Sam if they want to aggregate a couple of the key questions that I think we've discussed today, send those over to us, and we can work on getting answers that we can put together for folks. Ron or Sam, did you have anything that you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, this is Sam here, and we'll do that. And obviously, look, I mean, when we first talked about this last Thursday, I mean, the world's changed dramatically in the 3 or 4 days since. I suspect that'll be the case, as the days unfold. So probably the one thing we might want is, and no need to schedule it right now, but I suspect that we'll want to host another webinar probably next week, because something tells me this is going to be a bumpy week here. I mean, I think we're being empathetic with our policyholders. Everybody's scrambling to adjust. We'll have further questions as they come on. This has been a great start, but I think each week is going to bring whole new levels of questions. So if we could, the one request I'd make is, don't want to lock anybody into a particular time, but maybe have these as every other week or something like that as things evolve.
Yeah, this is Ron Gallagher with PAMIC. I'm not going to respond. I think Sam said it right, that we'll work together with you folks on these questions. So, and even hosting another webinar if we believe that's the right thing to do. However, Mike, I wanted to make sure you saw another question that came in through the chat function, okay? Because this has to do with insurance agencies and agents that are taking premium payments from consumers. And if I recall, the insurance agents were carved out from the governor's list of essential or life-sustaining businesses. So it does pose an interesting issue for consumers and the insurers. So if you could take a look at that question and see if we can come up with a good answer, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, Ron. I apologize. I didn't realize there was a chat function over here. So let me see. Can you provide clarity to insurance agents and wholesalers who are responsible for collecting premiums on behalf of our carriers, specifically agency billed policies where the carrier does not bill the insured directly? We do not have the flexibility that the insurance department memo refers to. Our carriers do not give us the authority to waive earned premium or backdate coverages that would be inherent in offering a policyholder a grace period for payment. Apologies to the questioner, as we didn't notice that function. But yeah, I think Ron mentioned that the face-to-face direct sales of insurance was not included in the life-sustaining piece of the governor's guidance. So that should cease. That doesn't mean, however, that the agency operation itself needs to cease, as folks still have the opportunity to go into the agency. They can have people drop off checks. I've heard from a number of agents about kind of leaving a sign on their door with a kind of a mail slot to be able to receive payment and make sure that continues in the policy and continues to be serviced. With that said, I think the commissioner may have some that she'd want to add on this as well.
I don't have anything to add on this one, Mike. Thank you for giving that good answer. I did just want to mention, because I saw a couple questions about the governor's guidance expected today, that the governor's new guidance did come out. It does include, even in the counties where he will be asking for folks to stay at home, the ongoing continuation of life-sustaining businesses, and insurance does continue to be designated as a life-sustaining business. So I think really for folks on the phone, this doesn't mean much of a change operationally, but just wanted to make folks aware that is now out there, and that is what that guidance says at this time.
Very good. I think there was one there. We've gone through 23 questions. There's about 10 left, and we're right up at 4 o'clock, and several of us have a hard stop. There was someone that asked about business interruption coverage that I think is now a focus of attention both at the state legislature and in Washington about how we protect insureds that have a business interruption policy. That policy may have or likely has an exclusion for pandemics. So it is an issue that we're monitoring as things progress both federally and across the states. Sam, did you want to make any comment on that, as I know you've probably been hearing quite a bit from the legislature?
Yeah, just what we've spoken about, and I know you and I, we've all talked about it. It is an ongoing issue. It has morphed, at least here in Pennsylvania, from sort of where it was a week ago. Have insurance companies cover it despite an exclusion, not covering it in the underlying policy and not collecting a premium, to where it is now, which is have insurance companies administer a program where in Pennsylvania at least, where the state of Pennsylvania would cover the business interruption. I think is sadly, as businesses continue to suffer further interruption and possibly long time closure, the scope of it, everybody will realize that's really a federal bailout function, not an insurance market function, but we're diligently working on it and talking with our legislature every day, and we hope the department gets engaged because, people talk about our fiscal strength, and it's to cover the risks we insure, not the risks we didn't insure.
Very good. Well, now the time is 4:02, so apologize if we didn't get a chance to get to your questions. We got to as many as we could, and I will turn it back over to Commissioner Altman.
Thanks, Mike. And I just want to thank you all again for joining the webinar. We're asking, I think everyone is having a lot asked of them right now in this country and across the world, but we are certainly asking a lot of you to continue to do the best you can by yourselves and your own family, by your policyholders, by your employees, and there are a lot of balancing interests, and we just incredibly appreciate the efforts that we've seen thus far, many proactive announcements coming from many of your companies on how you plan to take care of your employees and take care of your policyholders and do the right thing here. So please keep that coming, and just stress again that we are doing our absolute best to be as responsive as we can, that if there are questions that are industry-wide or affect a large part of industry, we will continue to do our best to push out guidance that people need, whether over webinars like this, which we will do more of if needed, as well as in writing to the extent that is helpful and appropriate. But also as individual company or entity questions come up, we're getting a lot of them. I think we're still being quite responsive, so please do bring those to us if you need us, and we will do our absolute best. But thank you again, and please everyone stay healthy and have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'm sure we will be talking soon. Ron or Sam, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add.
Just Commissioner, keep your team well and healthy. You're more important than we are, so everybody stay home.
To my knowledge, they all are, so stay that way, PID folks on the phone.
Good. And Commissioner, thank you for your time and the time your staff has taken. I know these are very challenging times for you folks as well as for the industry. And we look forward to working with you and Mike. And I do want to put out a kudos. Jessica, you had a great hire in Mike, and Mike's been doing a wonderful job working with us. And I want to make sure folks know that as well. And I'm sure he's being a terror in the office to make sure he's responsive to us with the staff. But we appreciate everything you're doing. With that, I guess, please follow Sam and PAMIC's website and emails for any future webinars. We'll work with the department to get these questions and answers put together, and we'll have them publish them where appropriate on their website. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.